what is this?
Oh no, it's already being traded on.
Oh yeah. Well, that's how to know. Like that's what caught me off guard was how to know that you're investing in a good company with a high ESG score. So you have now a company is not based off of what they sell and how well they make a product and how much they supply that good to the rest of the world. Yeah. They're based off of their environment, how they treat the environment while they're doing their getting their product and operating, how they are operating in society and culture through their social engagement, and how they operate within their governance of their own company. And I have a feeling, though, that governance, that G is not going to just be governance within their own company. It's going to move to governance, period.
Yeah.
Because they want to govern, these companies want to govern the world. And so it's kind of like, so which pharaoh do you want?
Yeah.
That you know.
Well, I mean, I think that's the fascist like ideal is that you've got companies running the.
Oh, check this out.
World.
So I'm sorry. Go ahead. What were you saying?
I mean, that's the fascist ideal that you've got companies running the world.
ESG is fascist by nature.
I think we're fascists and we're just creating. I mean,
things that will be that way.
Yeah.
Check this out. It says
it's magic.
So how do you get an ESG score? This is what it says. It says ESG ratings providers mine public information to grade companies and sort them into ESG indexes like sustainable impact, tobacco, environment, or women's leadership. Investors and financial advisors, in turn, look to the ratings and indexes. Who owns these indexes? To develop investment strategies or create ESG-focused mutual funds, index funds, and ETFs.
Wow.
So they have some SEC policies. I'm still going through. This is insane.
I think though. I mean, this sounds like when I was in the 6th grade, and my friends and I used to talk about how like I get we're not one of the cool kids, but we are cool in our own way, and they're all gonna find out someday that we really were the cool kids.
This is Revenge of the Nerds. Is that what this is?
Like I know we didn't make as much money as them, but they're gonna. But someday they're gonna be sorry.
Own all of this stuff.
And then this is the way that they came up with doing it. They're like.
Until recently, the ESG ratings industry hasn't captured much attention, possibly because ESG indexes feels like a logical outgrowth from passive investing, another style of index-based investing that now captures a large segment of the market. But the ratings that underlie ESG indexes are qualitatively different from, say, a total stock market index. You don't say.
You're sure?
Yeah.
It says nothing to do with whether or not the company is good at their job.
Recent reporting. No. It's not. It's saying whether or not they are good at their job and other things that we like, right? So it's saying like how are you good at your job when it relates to the environment? How are you good at your job as it relates to social issues? In one sense, though, I'm thinking they get it. There isn't one thing that you do that isn't connected to another, and they're understanding that about the world, and they're moving in on that area that we've kind of created this neutral ground on, and they're saying no.
Yeah.
No company gets to be neutral on the environment, on social issues, and how they decide to govern their little company. It isn't separate from the rest of the world. I feel like in one sense, I don't like what ESG is doing. I don't like the process that they're trying to do with ESG, but isn't it kind of inescapable?
It's inescapable in a certain sense, in that there's that everything is moral. I think what they're doing is they're trying to weaponize and monetize morality. They're trying to turn morality into a commodity that can be traded on, rather than it's.
But isn't that what it? But isn't that is it, so? That's kind of inescapable too, though, isn't it?
Well, no. I mean, this is indulgences. Like this is because you're giving up money, you're giving up productivity to meet these ESG scores. You're making sacrifices. You're buying indulgences by and you're turning like women CEOs into into a
prostitutes.
Exactly. Like, look, you may not be as good at your job, but you get us a better ESG score.
So
right, so it's a sacrifice to hire somebody now, and so it's an indulgence, but the reward is not eternal.
So then, would you? Oh, yeah. Okay. So then, would you look at something like affirmative action as indulgences too?
Oh yeah, it's a guilt repayment. You're paying off your guilt,
but not to the people.
Yeah,
there's no real sin of there's no repentance or restitution paid back to the people who were really
right. Which is what indulgences. That's what indulgences do. Step in and they say, "Look, I get you feel guilty. You can pay us off."
Yeah,
right? But who are they? I mean, they were paying off if you steal from somebody, the Bible says you have to give back to them double or
4 times,
quintuple or whatever it is, depending on how it all fell down. They're the ones that get paid back. This is a way of saying, we don't have to pay back the people we actually robbed. Right? So,
but we create a culture of those kind of
Yeah. So
help me, because I think you're right. I think you're right in one sense. I agree with that. It's a form of indulgence. But I look at the World Economic Forum right now. They are, if nobody's paid attention to the World Economic Forum, they're not seeing where this thing is going. Yeah. And I'm talking about all the aluminum foil things that we used to talk about in school that our parents talked about. We're like, hey, there's going to be this whole one world, new world order. That is the World Economic Forum, right? Yeah.
There were people taking notes on all of the old conspiracy theories and said, that's a good idea. And went for it.
Let's do. But you know what? I think that I don't think that anything's changed from the past where people wanted to conquer the world and have one world, a God or leader.
Right.
That's not anything new, right? We're just seeing it different with our technocracy now. We're seeing that it's maybe a little easier to do, right?
Right.
And everybody might want it because we have a certain sort of slave mentality where people don't want to do stuff for themselves. If we can make technology easier for everybody's lives, then what wouldn't they give to have a new ear?
Yeah.
They're literally growing and printing ears from people's DNA and giving them a new ear. They're doing it with fingers. They're doing it with hearts. They're doing it with lungs. They're doing it with jaw bones. They're literally printing bones right now. It's amazing. The technology, what they're doing is amazing. And so I see what they're doing, and I'm looking at that, and I'm saying, okay, in one way or another, this is inevitable. And I don't think that what we understand about the world and what the Bible tells us about the future, a one world order is inevitable. Period. Christ is king of the whole world. He's going to come back and rule it, and everything is being built and operating in that way that his enemies are being made his footstool, so that the world has a trajectory to sit under Christ as ruler.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it is being built that way. So when I see the World Economic Forum, I'm not really afraid or disappointed, no more than I would be about seeing Romans building roads. Right, like they're building roads for the gospel to go out on it.
Right.
I can't remember the book right now, but what was it? It was about TV. Oh, I should look it up. TV being the end of society, and he was talking about the fact that television is ruining us to the point that we can't think. But the problem is
amusing ourselves to death.
Thank you. Yes, amusing ourselves to death. And he says, I can't remember the line in there. But the line, basically, to summarize it, is that the method is the problem. Like that's the
Yeah.
the thing. And I read that, and
the medium.
The medium.
The medium is the problem.
Yes. Right? And I vehemently disagree with him because I felt like the medium can't account for the gospel. Right? It can account for a trajectory apart from what the gospel does when it gets in the system.
Yeah.
Right? So they already have, they know the medium is directed towards one thing, but God has always allowed people to think that this is what they were going to do, and they fall and fail, and God takes that, and then he has his people move into Canaan with vineyards that they didn't plant.
Right. Well, there's two things. I think there's two things wrong with his argument. And now the book, I think overall is
it's a phenomenal book. Phenomenal book.
I think that the pessimism of his argument is a problem. And for a couple of reasons. One, the Roman roads, if you look and say they're filled with Roman armies oppressing us, we need to get rid of the roads, then you are misunderstanding the power of the roads. There's a neutral power to the roads that once the Roman armies fell apart because the Roman armies attacked God's people, God pulled the rug out from under them.
Yeah.
Then the roads were left, and it was a way for the gospel to move. So
even during the persecution, it was
yeah. So the technology of the roads was itself neutral, and I think he would say, yeah, that's true, but his argument also involves what he calls a logocentricity that Western culture needs to survive. That it's not that if it becomes an image-centric culture, image-centric communication, if communication becomes image-centric, then there's no way to combat the idolatry that will come with it, right? And so that we need that the problem is that the image communication is replacing word communication, right? And that I think is a subtler and more a subtler aspect to his argument that often isn't dealt with well, because I think that's actually where what got us here was the modernist separation of word and image.
Yeah, right.
So to say we're becoming an image-centric culture, I think is true, right? He's absolutely right.
But the world is image-based world.
But that is a problem if it gets separated from the word.
From the word,
right?
So that's good.
So images in and of themselves aren't an issue. It's the separation of word and image that is the problem.
Can you explain that? Because I don't. The line that, and I think it's true that people say a picture says 1,000 words. You can't. How do you separate the two?
Right. So the way that they've separated the two is actually actually at the level of what can you know? Like, is it possible to truly communicate? And what happened was in the rise of the Enlightenment, that image communication was separated out from word communication, and so the rationalists said that the only place to really communicate truth was through logical arguments, was through rational, word-based logical arguments, so that you could deduce truth through word.
They were Republicans?
They're
rational,
or Republicans or Kantians, but let's say
we'll get there in a second.
Or Hegelians probably, but anyway,
ouch.
But yeah, Kantians. You have this. What you have is this separation and saying that the word communicated truly, and images were trying to always falsely. They couldn't truly communicate because they communicated via the emotions through through induction rather than deduction. You had this, and that wasn't a true communication. They said the same with stories, with metaphors, right? You have to actually peel that all away, and that the scientific either scientific rationalism or the rationalism that was sort of logical rationalism, though they argued back and forth, is it deductive or inductive logic that gets us to truth, but they agreed that it was only through deductive or inductive logic that you got to truth. And then images didn't really truly communicate unless they were explained with words. And so you ended up with modern art, which is like, oh, here's a red circle in the top left corner of a green canvas. And you look at it and say, there's no meaning. And they're like, well, here's what it means. And you get a little explanation, right? But they believe that about every image, right? And so it works its way into the images of modernist painting, that there's no true communication via image.
Did they produce that because of the way that they thought about images?
Yes. So because of the way they thought about knowledge and images, and the way that images couldn't actually communicate true knowledge,
they gave up that.
They gave up images, but they learned that from Christians. I mean, the buildings we built, the art we made, all of it. We said the same thing. It's all about words. So only words, only sermons, right? Our churches became lecture halls, and then our churches became Unitarian churches, historically speaking, right? You had this move towards a rationalistic Christianity that became a rationalism that became Unitarianism.
Is this kind of like what we were talking about last time, when we were talking about buildings and building nice buildings? Somehow in our liturgy, in our understanding, we gave up the reality of both the general revelation and special revelation living together in art and in special word from God. Those two things in harmony. We gave up that being a reality. And so we started building the type of buildings that had a theology like that.
Yeah.
And then we became people like the buildings that we built. We don't see beautiful art. Keep going. I don't want to stop there.
But there's a reason that it led to Unitarianism, right? Because in the Trinity, you have the word and the image and music held together as ways of equal ways of communicating. Jesus is the Word of God, and He is the image of God. Right?
Okay.
Right. So in Christ, word and image are held together, and so and then the Spirit of God is the one who glorifies the word and the image in time. Right. So He's the storyteller. He's the musician that glorifies time, that glorifies word and image in time. And so you have all of them held together. And so in distinctly Trinitarian understanding, distinctly Trinitarian cultures, you get art and music and poetry and song and dance, all that are, because it's a world in which those things are real. Those things are true, right? You can have a dance that is true in that kind of cosmology. You could, in a Trinitarian cosmology. Now, ancient paganism had cosmologies as well in which you could have that.
Yeah.
Modernism doesn't. Right? Like in college, I was in the Hawaiian Club. Obviously, because
that makes sense.
Yeah. Because I was the only Howley in the Hawaiian Club.
No, knowing you is like that completely makes sense.
And I was on the hula team, right? So, hula dancing is amazing. It's amazing art form, but it's a storytelling art form. So every movement of your hands and your hips and your and the way you place your shoulders and move your feet all are parts of stories. So it's sort of a living hieroglyphic where you've got images that communicate pieces of stories, and so you can put together different stories with the dance. It's a really cool art form.
You know, then you're saying that, I can just think about, so when R. Kelly comes on back in the day and people start dancing, part of what the adults would be like, hey,
I know what that means.
I know that story.
It's the Elvis.
Right, same thing. Right? Oh, I know.
I can't wait for Baz Luhrmann's Elvis movie.
Oh, I can.
I love Baz Luhrmann. He's so over the top.
I know.
Everything about him shouldn't be done.
I'm looking forward to it in one sense, but I want to see how much of the story they tell.
No, I know. Totally true. But it's going to be colorful. It's going to be full of music.
It's going to be good.
Yeah.
It's going to be good.
So, even if it's done, even if it's a bad story, he tells bad stories well.
That is so contradictory to what we just.
No, it is. But as a filmmaker,
you can. I know.
So I appreciate the artistry.
Yes.
Even when there are times when you're like, Baz, come on.
We can rescue bad films and show how they're being inconsistent within their own worldview as Christians.
Then the same way that a carpenter looks at a house that's built that's being misused and says, oh, but the joints in that house are amazing. Imagine if you also filled it with a family and not with a bunch of high schoolers or college students, smoking pot.
So,
which is basically a Baz Luhrmann movie.
I was going to say,
a bunch of college students smoking pot in a beautiful old house.
It might tell a different story, or he might tell on himself in this story. Who knows?
Yeah. But people saw Elvis, they saw R. Kelly, and they're like, no, that means something.
We know that story, and it's funny because when we see dance, we easily are able to make the connections of how that story plays out.
Yeah.
One way or another, and you can see other forms of dance, and you can say, that man loves that woman.
Right.
Like, and it's like, wow, that's beautiful. Like, we can see dance. We know there's a story there. We know it's communicating something that we've forgotten it in the modern age.
Like, Shakira is right. Like, hips don't lie.
Right.
And that's something that what the modern church has tended to do is say, shh, hey, come on. We don't dance like that. We don't talk like that.
Right.
And then our kids are like, yeah, but my body's telling me I should.
They're dislodged from reality.
So then they have to choose between dislodgement from their own bodies or running away, right? Like, Jesus doesn't want my body to work this way. But that's because we don't have a cosmology in which every boy hits puberty and is becoming an Adam, is becoming a priest of this creation. Every woman hits puberty and she's developing into a priest of creation, and that God intended that all in her body and in his body, and that it actually is pointing to something bigger, deeper, greater, and more beautiful. So you go down. We lived along the beach down in California, and I loved the spring in the Bay Area because it got sunny and nobody quite knew. It's beautiful, and all the guys and the girls go down to the beach just to bump into one another. I mean, sometimes physically, but I mean just socially, to go down and interact. You could walk down the beach there and hear 4 or 5 languages, and then watch all of the awkward teenagers just try to figure out how to become an Adam and an Eve. And it was amazing the amount of gospel opportunity that there is in the growing and the changing and the new desires, and that all of that is ultimately unfulfilled without Christ, because all of that points beyond itself to something greater and deeper. But we don't even know how to. We don't even know what we run away from all of the art that would give us the opportunity to have the conversation.
So you say gospel, I don't, then this is all connected to the separation between image and word, right?
Right, yeah.
So when you say there's gospel opportunity in puberty, what does that gospel opportunity looks like? Stop it. Because
sex is dirty, bad, and nasty. So save it for the one you love.
That's hilarious. My mom was different with us. Of course, I come from the charismatic background, word of faith kind of stuff. But my mom was very biblical. And people don't give charismatics the kind of appreciation they should when it comes to how much they love their Bible. They just don't always have the faculties to understand it. Right. But they love their Bibles. My mom would say, "Oh, I have a book called Song of Solomon." Right. And I have a bunch of kids here who are trying to figure out what's going on with them. How about I bring them in and we start reading through this book of Song of Solomon? Yeah. And everybody else in the church flipped out, like, like, what are you doing? And she's like, my sister has no breast. And we're all laughing in there. And she's like, what are you talking about? And then she goes to human anatomy. Yeah. And all of a sudden, the immaturity of it turns into a question. So what does happen? How does this, So, but how do you, that was from an environment that wasn't nearly as thoughtful or reformed or had a literary backdrop to work through. Yeah. What do you see the gospel opportunities inside of puberty?
So in terms of just the placement of the Song of Solomon, it's a book about how to prepare for kingship, right? So Song of Solomon, Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes are kingship books. What does kingship look like? And what you have is Solomon is the fulfillment of the wisdom that Adam failed to achieve. The Song of Solomon that's what you would have gotten with Adam and Eve had they not eaten the fruit, right? So Solomon is the gardener king. Adam was supposed to be the gardener king. Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of the gardener king. But what is the garden? So that's why it's full of garden imagery, but the garden imagery is that the kingdom is a garden. Solomon's personal life is a garden, and his wife is a garden. And he has to learn.
Say it again. I don't want to miss that. So
his kingdom is a garden, right? And he is the gardener of the kingdom. His personal life, how he deals personally with his own morality, with his relationship with God, with his visits to the temple.
That is a garden.
Is a garden in and of itself. And then his wife is a garden.
The wisdom. You know what you just did. You just did. I got to say it. We're just talking theonomy right now. We're just talking about self-governance, civil magistrate, and the home. Right?
Right, exactly. But those.
He's a priest too.
He's a priest king, right? He's a priest after the order of Melchizedek, so he's a priest king, and God is pulling back together things that were separated by the fall, right? So the fall sin shatters and pushes things apart. Grace restores and pulls things back together that are intended to be together. So, where Solomon has to go to get the wisdom to rule is by learning how to garden his wife well, and in order to garden his wife well, he has to learn to take care of his own self well, right? So, they turn out to all be created, and the wisdom that he needs to rule well turns out to be in his wife, in the prospering of his wife. And so you have a failure of husbanding of Eve leads to the destruction of the Garden of Eden. Right? She wasn't named Eve yet. But he failed to garden his wife, and so he lost his garden. Adam did. Solomon is placed back into that king. He's the first one that's ever said to have the knowledge of good and evil. So Solomon God says, hey, what do you want? And he says, I just need the wisdom to rule. Instead of saying he wanted money or he wanted power, he says, I need the wisdom to rule. And he says, that's the right thing to ask for a king. So you are going to have the knowledge of good and evil, right? So he's being restored to what Adam and Eve lost. So he'll be able to judge well. How is it that he's given that? Well, then he's given his wife, the Shulamite, which just means Mrs. Solomon. That's what Shulamite is in Hebrew, is Mrs. Solomon. So he's given a kingdom, but in order to become a good king, he needs to become a good husband, right? Because they are the same. They're the same task, right? They're wisdom tasks. The tasks are the same shape. And the other thing that is the same shape is eldering in the church, right? Pastoral ministry, which is why he who wants to be an elder desires a good thing comes immediately upon the discussion of Adam and Eve. So 2 Timothy, or 1 Timothy 2 is the discussion of Adam and Eve. 1 Timothy 3 is now that we're talking about Adam and Eve, let's talk about how this applies to pastoral ministry, elders and deacons. And why he who rules his house well will rule in the house of God well, and he who rules his house well will be a good king. Those are all pulled together and connected. So and when Jesus comes along, we're told, how do we know? How do we know what kind of ruler Jesus is? Well, we're told he's the kind of ruler that gives his life for his bride. Mm-hmm. Right? That's our encouragement, that he's a good king. He gives his life for his bride. So he'll rule. Oh,
that's interesting.
He'll rule the world well because he died for his bride.
If he can take care of his bride like that, he can rule us.
He can rule. Yeah, exactly.
With that type of, we can be secure that he's that type of guy.
Right.
So we're judging his character all based off of how he treats his woman.
Right. Exactly. And so when you've got a 15-year-old boy and you're walking into the gas station and you catch him checking out a 15-year-old girl walking out the door, our temptation is to say, stop it, cover your eyes, look away, rather than say, should we talk about how Jesus got one of those for himself, right? And then we'll know what you need to do to become someone who, so it has to start with Jesus, right? Because it's not getting a woman is not a workspace. It's not like, we do everything by faith except for go get a woman. We do that by works, right? We do that. We do it by faith because we do everything by faith from first to last, which means first we have to understand the nature of the promises involved in the love of a man and a woman, which Solomon says is one of the only things he doesn't understand, right? He's the wisest person ever. And he's like, let me give you a list of some of the things I don't understand. I don't understand how birds stay up in the air. I don't understand how the way of a man with a maid. How does a guy ever win a girl? There's something so mysterious that even Solomon doesn't understand it. But we want to break it down, and turn it into something we can make sense of. But it's an opportunity to say, remember how Jesus treats his bride, because that's your goal. That's what you want to grow up into. And so, yeah, she's pretty. Like, the curves are amazing, and all of that is good. And it's good for you to desire one of those. And there's a promise under which that desire can be had by faith. And that's what we don't.
Yeah, because we think that the only thing that a guy who hasn't been taught that is thinking in his head is, oh boy, I better figure out how to make sure this boy isn't lusting after this woman.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so the desire and lust aren't separated because they're running right next to each other. And we're like, that was trouble for me. I'm going to help him out.
Yeah.
Put the glasses on. Look this way, son. Like that.
And here's the thing: is I'm convinced that the reason that we can't do it is because we don't take our shame to the cross, and so we see our shame in our sons. Our sons.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because we haven't, we don't believe the gospel actually takes away our shame. We don't raise our sons well, or our daughters well either, right? Because they go and they see, they see a guy attracted to a girl and they think, ooh, I want that.
I want that attraction.
Right? And we don't, and instead of saying, good, okay, all right, let's talk about what does that mean? Why is it that God created you that way? Right? That we were talking about the woman at the well this week.
Yeah.
Right. That when Jesus looks at her and says, "Woman," right? That she comes under conviction because she hasn't been using her femininity the way God designed it to use, and that's good news to her, right? When he says, "Here is the way your femininity is supposed to be used," right? There's a way for that to be used properly. She runs back and says, "You guys got to hear this, right? There's a proper way to be a woman, right? There's a fruitful way to embrace and enjoy my femininity." My wife, it's really funny, but whenever the girls are leaving the house, she's like, "All right, hey, go have fun. Guard your carnal treasure," right?
Guard your carnal treasure.
And they all laugh. And they're like, "Oh, Mom, that's so awkward." And she says it with all their friends around.
Might have to steal that line.
It's so good. But that there's something that there is a treasure that God is bringing into the world through them, right?
Yeah.
And there's something good intended by all of it, and it's the same reason that we want our sons opening the doors for their sisters. Some guy that's not going to treat her like she's a treasure and an avenue through which treasure and glory comes into the world. We want some guy to doesn't open the door and her immediately to think like, dude, my brothers would never let me.
Yeah.
My brothers would never treat me like that. We want our sons planning on having the kind of brother-in-law that they want by how they treat their sister.
Yeah.
Right? To see their sister and think, what kind of brother-in-law do I want? I'm going to treat my sister the way I want someday to have a guy treat her when he's married, so that I can have a good brother-in-law.
And what you just did in all of this was connect back word to image.
Right.
Right. That's repairing that fraction that's there, that separation that's there between the art, the beauty, the visual that we see, along with the actual words.
Yeah.
So that we can make sense of it.
What kind of creature am I is a question of what am I imaging and what story am I in? Right. The word and the image within me are pulled back together by the gospel. And then I transform the world in such a way that word and images are pulled back together.
So we got there because, again, we were talking about the World Economic Forum, talking about ESG. You walked in, I was like talking about ESG scores. I'm fascinated by it because I keep on thinking, like, again, I would say this, the world is going a particular type of direction. It's going to the culmination of Christ ruling and reigning on his throne in time and space when he comes back, right? He's reigning now, but we'll visually see it at that point, after God has conquered all his enemies and put them underneath his feet. And so I see the leaven in the loaf rising.
Right.
And when I look through the past and I look through the present, I'm seeing, the world sees this too.
Yeah.
Right? They know there is going to be a central throne which all things will come from. Right? They understand in one way or another. Now they're getting it wrong because they refuse to acknowledge the reality of who's going to be sitting on that throne. But and so I'm trying to.
I mean, I think it's a Napoleon type of moment.
What do you mean?
Right. So after the French Revolution, they separated the revolutionaries. They tore down the statues. They did everything. They even restarted the calendar. They did everything.
Started at one again.
They restart because they were saying we need to separate from all of our traditions, separate from the past, and rebuild humanity along these new philosophical lines. Right.
Yeah.
And that led to a third of Paris going to prison. You had the mass murder, the invention of
the guillotine.
That in order to efficiently take the heads off people, you had to actually invent a machine.
A sword is taking too long.
So the guillotine ends up like thumping through so many people that the chaos needs to be brought to bay. And so Napoleon shows up, right? So you get an emperor, you get a tyrant and it's what makes Napoleon such a difficult figure is Napoleon really does rescue France from devouring itself. And Napoleon is a tyrant. So, but the tyrant was brought in.
He was better than
by the release of the violence, the erotic violence.
I got to tell you what my daughter said. So we're watching What Is a Woman by Matt Walsh, watching this documentary, and it's a good documentary. I have some problems with it. It's a good documentary, though, and everybody needs to watch it. And I'm watching with my daughter and my son. We're watching as a family, and we're stopping and talking about the gospel, how God made the world. It's really good. And my daughter's on the other side of the room, and she's watching it, and she's like, "Oh man," he's like, "He's so good." And I was like, "Yeah, he is." I was like, "Would you believe me if I told you he was a Catholic?" And she's like, "He'll do for now." I was like, "Girl, daughter's 14. Like, you get it." It was one of those.
Funny. Yeah.
It's like Napoleon. Like,
totally.
He'll do for now.
He'll do for now. And but God basically was like, okay, France is going to destroy itself, and I've got plans for French people to stand before my throne at the end of time. So he's got to rescue France. So he sends in Napoleon,
like a gracious judgment.
Yeah, exactly. And God's judgments are that way. But there's no doubt that Napoleon is a judgment. But looking back in history, you also see the way Napoleon was a blessing in the story, right? And I think we've got something similar going on right now with the rise of tyranny. I mean, you look at what we're doing to ourselves right now. I mean, I don't go on Twitter very often, but
you don't.
Yeah,
and hardly ever.
I went on. I went on this morning, and there was a lady doctor on there explaining that having a baby will ruin your body, and you need to know it so that you can women can responsibly choose to not have children, because it's going to ruin their body, and your body will never be the same. And it's like, did people not know that? I mean, I don't think that. I think I think people know that, right? I don't think that's the reason that of course it changes you, right? But not having the body of a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old or a 22-year-old anymore, that's only a bad thing if there's no reward, right? Like, and the reward is children, right? The reward is getting to be a mother. The reward is the growth in the relationship, the growth that happens in marriage. The reward is grandchildren eventually, great-grandchildren, and the generations that come from them that rise up and call you blessed. And then the eternal reward of eternity with all of these people that came through you, getting to be the door. And that's why we hold doors open for women, because we all came through the door of a woman. That is such a blessing. It's like, well, I would rather stay closed and never become a door through which people come into the world.
It's funny to me that liberals never seem to see trade-offs in economics, but always seem to find trade-offs at life.
Right.
You know what I mean? And she just had no problem telling you, hey, if you have children, your body, it is not going to be the same as it was before. Things will be different for you. Right. Now, you could have grandkids after this, and you could have a whole generation of people who love you and take care of you. It might be your blessing that you don't even know about. But do you really want to mess up your body?
You don't want to mess up your body.
Well, here's the trade-offs here. All of a sudden, she's talking trade-offs. It's like, when did you?
Well, I think what's so hard, too, is like something that was never explained to me about marriage and the way and what happens in marriage over time is the depth of love that I have for my wife now is not something I could have imagined.
No, I keep telling people that they don't hear me when I say this.
But I didn't have imaginative space for it. There's no way.
Right, but nobody ever tells you that either.
Right, yeah. That's true.
That's what made me mad. When I got married, so we're at 17 years now. Where are you at?
Yeah, 23.
23. Okay, so I know that at 23, whatever I got at 17 is going to be crazy.
Right. Yeah, totally.
I try and tell people, they don't be listening. You don't know how good this is.
Right. We'll be out somewhere and my wife will be like, don't look over there. You got some young hoe over there. And I'll be like, and it's funny.
Erin is hilarious.
She's the funniest. and she's kind of being funny, but also she's
kind of not.
Kind of not.
She nails it.
And I'm like, she didn't bring 4 of my babies into the world, right? Like, I'm not interested in that.
Right.
I don't know how you could jump ship.
Right.
when we've raised 4 children together. We've got adult children now. Like the idea, like I just saw somebody talking about, or there was a divorce of an older couple, and it was an older NBA guy. I can't remember who it was now. And they were talking about, but I think it was Jason Whitlock. I think that's where I heard about it, is he put something up there, like he reposted something about like, dude, don't let your marriage fall apart. You don't, I know you think you want to go back to dating,
but you don't want to be out here.
Yeah, you don't. And so it was a guy that had gone through divorce like 5 years earlier, and Whitlock had reposted it. And I was like, I can't even imagine that, because how would you be attracted to somebody that hasn't had your children? Like, it gets so wrapped up. The story of our marriage has so much hidden glory that only she and I know. The stuff we've been through, the times we've run out of money and not had any, the times that we have gone through health crises, the times that that the doctor says, hey, you've got this, here, you've at one point, so this was about 7 years ago, Erin had just been really sick, and it kept getting worse. Went in and they were trying to figure out what it was, and she was diagnosed with chronic lung disease, which is what her mom died of.
Yeah.
And thankfully it turned out to be a misdiagnosis.
Yeah.
She was allergic to acacia trees, and we had moved on to a property that they had planted acacia trees to mark the edges of the property. So there were 13. Our house was surrounded with 13 acacia trees, and we didn't even know what acacia was. And so it's misdiagnosed. But basically being told, hey, your wife has 8 months to 2 years to live, and she's going to die the same way her mom did. And we were married when my mother-in-law died. And so I'd watched my mother-in-law go through it, and the depths of grief involved, and then my mom had to come and move in with us as we were working through it, and then the joy of discovering that wasn't what it was, and then being able to move, and she got better, and that part of our story nobody else has. Right. So the kind of bond that the living bond of the covenant of marriage, I think is something that, because we have separated image and word, and we've separated our marriage away from what Christ has done on the cross, and they are no longer, we no longer are living images of the declared gospel. We don't let history knit us close together. Mm-hmm. We don't let our histories become the continually knitting process of the Holy Spirit the way God intended him to be. So
I think somehow too, you were talking about wisdom and Solomon. Somehow I think that one of the things that we got to rediscover as men, everybody's talking about being a man right now. Everybody's talking about masculinity right now, but it's somehow disconnected from women. I don't like that.
Right.
It's disconnected. So there's a couple things here, and we're still talking about
the World Economic Forum.
Yeah. Because it's the way the world works. They're inside of, I was thinking about this the other day, thinking about D-Day and thinking about those kind of men that existed, and how that men like that build environments and cultures that allow us to be on microphones like this in an air conditioned room in a safe environment. We don't expect anybody to run in and blow us up or shoot us.
Right.
We are on a foundation of strong men who sacrifice their lives that we will never know.
Right.
And they will be forgotten. And the only thing that will stand will be the beauty of what it is that they have. But that's what foundations do.
Yeah.
Foundations, no one walks in a building and says, wow, what a beautiful foundation.
Right.
That's not what men are for.
Yeah.
And anybody who walks inside of a building and says, what a beautiful foundation, is missing the point.
Yeah. Right. Or they're an engineer.
Missing the point.
Exactly.
I build buildings. This is so. Yeah, he can see better. It's it's like a theologian. He can walk in and see the reason the beauty exists is because it's standing on something. I want to say that I can tell everything about a man by seeing his wife and family. That's all I need to know. Mm-hmm. I've seen some amazing guys in person. I see their family. I'm like, you aren't amazing.
Right.
Like you have missed.
There's a facade.
Yeah, this is pride. You're about you, and you haven't thrown yourself into your family. I don't care how much knowledge you have. Your family is what tells on you.
Yeah.
And it's what qualifies you or disqualifies you from a lot of different offices. But
because when you take on an office, the institution that you're an officer of will become like your wife.
Boy, that's scary. Because we got a lot of people serving in areas of offices that are divorced. Mm-hmm. And have rejected. We were just talking about this the other day. Gabe says this. He says weird stuff sometimes, but he's so right. But he was talking about Fox and what they do, and he's like, all you have to do is look at all the people at Fox, and all of them, the divorce rate is through the roof on the third marriage. Okay, maybe this isn't even biblical, but I'm just saying maybe the first time you know what you was doing, you weren't a Christian, something happened. Right. The second time and the third time, something's wrong with you, right? And then we're sitting here sopping up all this morality from someone who doesn't have any equity for it, And so there is this loss in our conversation of masculinity. We've put the focus on foundation without understanding that foundation is the thing that holds up the beauty. So something that when you see a woman who is doing her work well, who is happy and joyful, who has kids who obey her, and people talk about her, that is what's supposed to happen.
Right.
A beautiful home is the kind of home that has a man who's been forgotten because he's holding and doing his thing right. You know, it's like, where's your dad at? Oh, somewhere in the library, cutting the grass, mowing. You know, I don't know. He comes around for dinner. We all have a great time, but he'll be here soon. But they're all having a blast, right?
Yeah.
Because of what he has sacrificed for, so that beauty can exist. And we've forgotten that. We've forgotten. So when we talk about hard men, when we talk about men, our purpose and what we need to be focused on is the beauty and the love of our women and our wives, so that we produce families that are beautiful, because love for our wives is what makes us do what we do.
Right. Well, we were just in one of our meetings at Laura last week, and it's all the founders of the company are there, and one of the guys was like, at what point did you realize that your decisions actually mattered, with what you did actually made a difference between whether or not you were going to be successful or not? And we all kind of laughed, and we're like, when we met our wives, every single one of us, it was, when I met when I met that girl and thought, oh shoot, I got to stand up straight if I'm gonna take her home. To a T, every single one of us, it was that moment. And so, we joke around because we've got some boys in the house that we're raising, and my wife does an amazing job of teaching them and training them and talking to them and helping them understand things. But there are times where you're just like, it just is like dropping marbles on an empty bowl. Like, last week I was like, you're doing an awesome job. He needs to meet a girl though. Like, so keep everything you're saying is going to make sense to him when he meets that girl. And he says, okay. And she's like, how do you, like, and she's like, I don't get that. And I was like, but you remember, you
forgot about me.
You remember me?
Yeah.
She's like, oh yeah.
It's been 23 years. You never forgot. Yeah.
That there's this, there's something in the way God designed men that there's it's a switch, or it's not even a switch. There's a resonating that happens in a deep part of who they are that doesn't come alive until it's time to go win a girl, right? That there's something about God's design, and I think that's the reason there's 4,000 years of history before Jesus comes, right? That the world entered puberty.
I'm sorry, what did you just say? The world entered puberty?
I think. That's my theory. I don't know.
Oh, please tell more.
I think there's, because people are always like, why did God wait so long to send Jesus? Wait so long to call Abraham? And I was like, the world had to grow up. The world had to grow up. There's a maturity,
and it was going to happen anyway. If you look at the garden, there's a form of, it's like, hey, go take dominion. There is a form of, oh man, you know what? Hold on, that makes a lot of sense, because now if you think covenantally and you think about this in a post-millennial, even if you're not post-millennial, which everybody's post-millennial, you're always thinking about a form of maturity of time. In some sense, you're thinking about a growing up stage of the world. Adam had the garden that was immature, and eventually he was supposed to grow up to be a full man.
Right.
He was being taught by. Okay, that's interesting.
So, because I think that time is actually a blessing, right? And we always want things, especially now. We want it immediate, right? Even more now so than in other times, because of the technological blessings that come. I used to have to go. I inherited a really cool encyclopedia of the history of art from my mom. My mom was an artist. She's a really great painter, and we've got some of her paintings around our house, and she was really great pencil drawings, and she when my mom and dad were young, they saved up and bought this really nice encyclopedia of art, and it's got all sorts of tabs in it from things that I've looked up and read on, but I used to have to say, like, okay, well, I got to wait till I get home because I got to look up I would make a note about reading something, and it'd be Botticelli's Venus, and I'd be like, oh God, I got to go look at that. So we have to wait till I get home, go to the Encyclopedia of Art, look at it, find it, and now it's like Botticelli's Venus. Oh,
on your phone.
Pull it up on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is, I think, one of the greatest things ever. Even though sometimes it's not accurate, that's how libraries work. But you've got like the largest library in the history of the world in your pocket all the time. Google Books, which has been taken down because of fascism, but
you said Google, so
yeah, I know, exactly. So, but we want things so instantaneously that I think we have the illusion of knowledge often rather than
real knowledge.
Because we've got the facts, but we don't.
Can you separate that? So what's the illusion of knowledge versus real knowledge? So if you had to say, like, real knowledge is what? Experiential?
I think it's historical.
It's covenantal.
Yeah, it's covenantal. So
interesting.
Adam knew his wife, right? And we tend to think, oh, that's a euphemism, that because the Bible's embarrassed to talk about sex, but it's not embarrassed to talk about sex.
Not, no,
right?
not at all.
So I think it's actually it's explaining to us that there is a kind of that knowledge is a historical, growing, maturing thing. So there's a difference between, we were just talking about this with dealing with financial woes, in where it's like, look, I trust Jesus. Okay, He's going to take care of me. He's got the cattle.
Yeah.
And you also know you don't know because you're worrying, or you're up at night, or you're waking up in the morning out of into a sudden, like, oh my gosh, I got this, I got that. How am I going to make it? How am I going to get the bills paid? So you can know and know that you don't know because the knowledge has to work itself into your habits of thought, work itself into your habits of action, work itself into your habits of being. Is that through time?
Is that a remembrance type of thing? So when you say, that's why, you'll see the Old Testament, they would leave markers. Mm-hmm. Say, remember when we couldn't get on the other side of this?
Yeah.
And God came through for us? Oh, look at here. Here's wells that were planted by our forefathers because God was good to them. So that's a covenantal kind of thing that leaves knowledge. So we can trust God even though we might not have the same sort of experience that they've had. But here's a sign of God's faithfulness. Well, we have the Bible.
Right. How much more? We have the resurrected Christ,
Right.
Yeah, and I think that working the historical, the knowledge about and the knowledge of, maybe, I don't know how exactly to divide it, but you can know about the fact that God is going to take care of you. And then you meet old people who say, look, let me tell you some stories. I remember my dad telling the story of he and my mom, newly married, and they had this jar where they were saving up for snow tires, because that's what you need up in this area, snow tires. They had a car with no snow tires, and my dad, saying, hey, meeting somebody who needed the money more than them, and saying, okay, I'm sure God's going to take care of us. And they gave their snow tire money to somebody who needed it. And my mom came home and was like, "You did what?" It's like, I gave away our snow tire money because they needed it. I was like, "Yeah, but we actually need snow tires, right?" Right. Like, I think God will have to provide us the snow tires. And my mom she said, I was really upset. And, but then my dad was on his way to school or to work, I can't remember, and picked up a hitchhiker. And because that's a big part of my dad's salvation was a hitchhiker. 2 hitchhikers in a row shared the gospel with him. And that was his first introduction to the gospel.
And his heart burned inside him.
Yeah. Well, he was like, well, that's weird. And it's the first was a group of Jesus people, hippies, picked him up and said, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? And he said, I'm a Catholic. We don't do that. But he said, I didn't even know what it was what it meant that I was a Catholic. He's like, I just knew that I'd heard that growing up. We're Catholics. And so we don't, and then this group of hippies drops him off, and the next person that picks him up is this little old lady, and says the exact same phrase that this group of like 19-year-old whack job hippies that just got saved. So he could set them aside as, well, no, they're just crazy. But then this little old lady picks him up in her car, and the exact same phrase comes out of her mouth, and he says, I don't, but this group of hippies just picked me up and said the same thing. So how about you tell me about it? Right. So she sort of explains it to him. And so my dad, he picked up hitchhikers the rest of his life as a way of remembering God's grace. And so I pick up hitchhikers now as a way of remembering God's grace to my dad, and have gotten a chance to share the gospel, picked up weirdos and crazy people, and never with my kids in the car, and so my dad picks up this hitchhiker, and he says, hey, if you just drive me up here, I've got another car. I just need to come back out and fix my broken car, or jump my car with it. And he's like, okay. And she takes him up to his car, and he says, while you're here, I got these 4 snow tires. Do you want them? And it was the exact snow tires that they were saving up to buy. And so he's like, yeah, this would be great. So throws them in the back of his car and brings them home. It's like,
ta-da!
So
look at God.
So when you're raised hearing stories like that, that helps immensely because you're building generational habits of trusting God, not just singularly. And then when you're raised hearing stories about grandma and grandpa being provided for, hearing, parents tend to want to hold back all of their worries from their kids, but then that holds back God's relief of the worries from your kids too. And so living in such a way that you share, hey, we don't have enough money for this month, we're going to pray, and then they get to see God provide, right?
Because they're covenantal children,
right,
who should be baptized, because you're teaching them to pray like you pray, right? And for them to say, God answered my prayer.
Yeah, so then they get to grow up in that, and then they get to see God provide for them as well. And so there's this, there's a generational faithfulness that helps, but it's still all the history of God taking what we know to be true and turning it into a way that we live, right? From faith to faith is the way God works it out. So
okay, so I have I'm going back to the World Economic Forum, okay, because I think we got all kinds of stuff in there, images, the new modern era, this whole 9, and I keep pushing this idea that's inescapable that we're going to go in a particular type of direction. Okay, am I wrong to say the World Economic Forum gets it right, but they get it wrong? So the World Economic Forum is seeing a world where there's going to be one Lord, one setup that is going to manage and run the whole world, and that it's going to create this harmony because of this, and everybody's going to have to come under submission to that. So when I see ESG, environment, social governance, that's the way that companies are being traded right now, starting to be traded, and people are starting to have in their own ESG score, right? So how are you with the environment? What is your engagement with social issues? And then how does I don't know what they would do with governance for individuals. I'm guessing it's their home. It'd have to be something like that. But when I go out I am operating with that kind of worldview, but with a different king, a more gracious, loving king. I'm saying to companies, no, you can't do this. This is wrong. God will judge you for your sin on that. Repent. Here's the way that you govern the world. Here's the way that you do economics. Here's the way that you do business. I'm coming with a whole world view of what's good, righteous, and just.
Yeah.
So the question isn't to me whether or not we're going to have a one world order. We already do. Okay. The creator made the world. It's his world. He's giving out the orders and you have to obey. The question is, who is going to be Lord over this one world order? Because when Jesus said all authority was given to me, go and make disciples, baptizing and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded, that wasn't just to one particular place. It was to the whole world, because he's king of the world. So
not just this mountain, but
not just this mountain. Yeah. And so I don't look at the World Economic Forum and be like, oh, they're totally getting this wrong. I want to look at them and say, like, they have the wrong structure of what this is going to look like. But they're creating a form of morality. They're creating a form of Levitical priests. They're being theonomous in a negative sense of the way because they have the wrong God. But we look at the World Economic Forum and we think, oh my goodness, this is horrible. Now, I think the way that it might happen would be small entities coming into covenant with each other and bonding with each other underneath the umbrella of Christ, right? And so I can see that, just like the same way we see churches who have Christ as their head are not all unified, but are unified underneath a particular doctrine and share in that relationship. And so I think the church is the model of what it will look like in a lot of ways, or the discipling model of what it would look like to the rest of the world, for Jesus to be king of the world and without this autonomy from each other, right? So we will have certain things, but inside of these spheres. So you got the home, you have the civil magistrate, you have the church, you have, and I'll say this again, home and economy, I don't want to separate. Those two things are the same for me. Yeah. But those are separate entities, but are still under the same type of authority, which what is righteous and what isn't. All that ESG is doing is the attempt of the secularists to recreate that type of reality at the end of the day. And I see everybody running from it, and I'm just like, wait, I want to run from you being in charge of that and how that's designed to be set up and operate, because you are a judgment, right? And I think you get World Economic Forum. It's almost like what you said with, what's his name? Napoleon.
Right.
Well, these guys are going to destroy themselves, and here's World Economic Forum.
Right.
It's a horrible tyranny.
It is.
And by the way, this is not me supporting the World Economic Forum at all.
You're trying to say, what story are we in?
Yeah. Yeah. And absolutely.
I think there's it could be a Babel situation where you've got a false mountain. Right. So you've got the mountain of the Lord that we're supposed to go up, and then you've got the false mountain of Babel.
We'll build our own mountain.
Build our own mountain.
Yeah.
And those always come down, and then God in His sovereignty supersedes. But I also think there's a something that is in the. That it starts with Boethius in the Consolation of Philosophy. Boethius was a Roman Christian, and when a heretical governor takes over, he holds fast to orthodoxy and ends up in prison. But he was nobility, and so prison for nobility in the late Roman antiquity is like you have to stay, like you're forced to stay at my lake cabin.
This is a house restraining order.
It's like, yes, but so it's kind of like a nice, it's not a bad thing, but then he ended up executed, but he didn't expect to end up executed.
Do we ever?
Right, yeah. It was false charges, but it was false charges because he stayed orthodox when the governor became a heretic. He started denying the Trinity, and he had literally written the book De Trinitas, a defense of the Trinity, before, and then the governor, so he becomes sort of persona non grata, and he wrote the Consolation of Philosophy, and in there he develops a theory of history that called the Wheel of Fortune.
The wheel?
The Wheel of Fortune. So history is ruled under God by fortune, and that God. So that there's that there is an up and down movement as history moves forward of particular people and nations. So sometimes they rule, sometimes they don't, and that you can expect that. The who is at the top and who is at the bottom to shift and change, and because of that, when you're at the top, you need to act a certain way because at some point you're going to be at the bottom, and so how you treat the people at the bottom is important because
that can be
as
shifted.
It moves forward, that's going to shift, and you're training the people at the bottom for when they get to the top on how to treat you when you're at the bottom, right? So that there's this, and that is. And that has to do with economics, power, all of those things, and that it's actually a good thing for the center of economic and political power to shift and move from people group to people group to people group. That there's a blessing in that, but it's still a forward movement. Right. So as history moves forward, there's also a death and resurrection happening within peoples.
Interesting.
So that is really important in terms of the theory of history in the establishment of Christendom in the Middle Ages. So that was one of the things that everybody agreed on, was that you're going to have within, you have all of these nations. There's feudal systems as well as clan systems, as well as kind of tyrannous kingdoms that all exist within Christendom, and they all have their own way of self-rule. But because they all agreed on what they called the fickleness of the Wheel of Fortune, right? That I can't guarantee, so I can have money in this generation, and my kingdom might be at the top right now, but I can guarantee that it won't always stay there. Because of that, I need to treat the poorer nations within Christendom a particular way, right? So,
this is kind of why I hear Doug say, hey, if you have to create a society, you want to create a society where if you didn't know where you were going to enter into that society, you would be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so there's something, and so that's one of the foundational aspects of that that has been lost from Christendom, right? When Christendom fell apart, and Christendom really existed until World War I. So World War I was the dismantling, the final dismantling of Christendom. Yeah. So in terms of the agreed upon rules of how we treat one another, even if we have to go to war, there's still an expectation that we are going to treat one another a particular way, knowing that I might defeat you in this war, but the way that I treat you when you're my prisoner makes a difference because you're probably going to defeat me in the next war.
You're so right about that. That's what you saw at the end of World War I. We probably wouldn't have had World War II had they actually been gracious in how they treated the people that they conquered in World War I,
Right.
and the people who they conquered with in World War I, right? They just kind of shrugged off Japan, and like there's a lot of things that happen, and that's a good point. Okay, that's okay. Okay.
So
anyway,
so that the theory of history, the optimistic understanding of history is all throughout the Middle Ages. I mean, you have some places where it dips in it, but for the most part, there was an optimistic expectation that as the gospel goes forward,
the world changes.
The world changes, but it doesn't change in a sort of, you're moving up the way when you're hiking, like through a mountain range,
like puberty and like maturity, right?
Yeah.
It matures. So what you're saying is it's not like a French Revolution,
right? So I think the World Economic Forum is more along the lines of, that's facts. They have that optimistic, they have a secular optimistic eschatology, but that that it's going to keep moving up and up and up and up. And that is what blessing looks like. So
absolutely.
Whereas in Christendom, for England to look over and see France be blessed, that's a good thing, right? It's a blessing. And even if what finally tore Christendom apart was mercantilism, right? Which is when my economic gain depends on your economic loss. Right.
It's what we get when we play with the markets a lot, right? So
I can only gain when so mercantilism and Marxism have that same assumption, the zero sum economics. That there's a particular amount, and for me to have some, you have to have less. For me to have more, you have to have less. But that's not the kind of world we live in, right? So, and in the Middle Ages, they understood that, right? That me having less and you having more has nothing to do with economics. It has to do with God's rule and reign, and His decision about what's best for our nation and for our spiritual growth and maturity. Right, so he moves us up and down on the wheel of fortune rolls. We move up and down
in God's sovereignty.
In God's sovereignty, and that's because God has a spiritual hope for our people, right? A maturity that He is moving us towards that requires death and resurrection, and including economic death and resurrection. And so if I'm at the bottom, it's not because you took from me that you're at the top, right? It's because God has the same plan for your people as He does for my people, for the French as He does for the English, as for the German, which is the continued spiritual growth and maturity. And He uses economic ups and downs in order to develop
those maturities
within us. So, and that's why the church as a non-economic institution, being the thing that held together Christendom, was so important, right? The church, and why when the church became an economic institution, Christendom starts to
When did the church become economic institution, do you think?
1400s was really when you start
it's the Catholic Church, right? You start seeing
this was about 100 years before the Reformation. You really start seeing
penance and
the formation of standing armies in the church, which is for economic reasons. What happened, and the three popes, all kind of forming, trying to take over. The reason you get multiple popes is because you control enormous amounts of land and money and resources, and you have
political. Did they not read Leviticus?
It's not. No, they didn't.
They didn't read it. What were they doing? Like there was.
So you have
there was one tribe that didn't get land,
right?
You know what I mean?
Right. And it's important for the Levites to know, to have the Levites' non-economic existence, or their existence as a non-economic tribe, is really, really important for the economic health of everyone.
Right.
Because the economic health of everyone is a covenantal blessing that's based on faithfulness, and the faithfulness, but it is not in itself the end goal.
Yeah.
Right. So, the church, it's so important for the church to be a non-economic institution. I mean, this is why the tax benefit, what we call tax benefits, were established, in the common law system. The tax benefits of the church, they're not tax benefits. It's the acknowledgement that the church is not an economic institution. The church is not a capitalist institution.
So am I seeing break apart then what I'm seeing when I look at the World Economic Forum, because I see them and I'm like, this wrong, that wrong, this wrong. Economics. So they have put salvation in economics.
Yeah.
And it's flipped backwards. This is like the world is made to disciple you into the person of Christ, right?
Right.
But they have it flipped backwards where everything is that is the salvation itself, is everybody being flat, right?
Well, as everybody is having the same amount of money, or
right. I'm not talking about that at all, because I think that's not right in any way. But that's not even how God made the world. I mean, you're taller than I am, right?
Yeah, right.
I got friends, oh my goodness, who are richer than me and poorer than me, and I submit to them, and so there's all kinds of different realities of our humanity that don't have to be the same for us to be human, right? The World Economic Forum doesn't believe that at all. Right,
because it's a Gnostic institution.
But so is everything else that we work through. But they're just going the trajectory of the God of the age right now. But there's something that they don't have wrong that I think Christians have missed out on, which is there is a king, there is a central point to this world, not just your little circle, the whole world, and they are operating like that. This ESG score is a way for people to say, how do we as the world have a common moral system?
Right. and that's what the common moral vision for the world is the thing that when the church is healthy and well established and is doing what it's supposed to, that is the thing that makes internationalism possible.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely. Gary North wrote a great book on this. Is it Healer of the Nations?
Oh, I haven't read that one.
His argument in the book, which I think is phenomenal, is that the church is the only real international, capable international communicator, because it doesn't have any borders.
Yeah.
Nations have borders, families have borders, individuals have borders. The church is the only institution that has no borders. So its kingdom is over this world, right? The Christ kingdom is over this world, which they are prophets of and priests of. So they can go to other nations and say, knock it off.
Right.
You are in sin, right? Repent to your brother nation and act right.
Well, you had emperors excommunicated,
right,
until they repented of things that they did that were legal but sinful.
Right.
So they weren't removing. They didn't say we're going to make you not emperor anymore, because they hadn't broken the law.
Right.
They had sinned grievously and publicly, and so they were excommunicated. And this is what Ambrose is one of my heroes. Is he just excommunicates the emperor, refuses him. Was it the governor of his province? I can't remember. It was the person who has political authority over him, and he literally he shows up and he says, "I'm taking communion anyway." It was a Nancy Pelosi moment.
Oh, okay.
And he goes up and lays on the table.
Oh, yes. I've heard this story.
And he says, "No, you're not." And he walks away angry, but he comes back eventually in sackcloth and ashes and publicly repents to his congregation of the sin that he had committed that was not illegal but was sin, and is restored to the table. And then, and that's what ends up, down the road, it actually changes the law on eventually, but it doesn't start with changing the law. It starts with this story of Ambrose refusing communion to the political.
And you know why? Because the church was a real government.
Right. The church was a real government over the souls of men, spiritual things. But
and this is what I think that what we see happening with, and again, the World Economic Forum is functioning like a god or a church and priests.
Yeah.
They're saying we need a world moral code to operate with economy. When anybody talks about economy, it ain't talking about business, people.
Right.
And they know that. That's why they play it through businesses. They're talking about homes.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yep.
So it's whatever you see happening in the supposed, with the air quote, business world, it's actually happening with the family. That's what they're getting towards.
Right.
And so they know that. But they are functioning, and I want to say that type of morality standard, or that form of morality, isn't up for grabs. Jesus is the one whose blood has paid that debt.
Right.
It's his. He gets to set the morality for the whole world. The difference is they are acting like that, though, unlike we are. And I'm like, hold on.
Well, I think and often this is how it works, is a heresy is what brings the church to its senses. Right. and I think, the number of people that I've talked to that walked away from dispensationalism during COVID is through the roof.
It's amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
But a big part of it is the government's overreach is a heresy.
Come on now, you better say that.
Right. So and this is what I've been,
bro. Write that down. Go ahead, I'm listening.
So because this is why our discussions about Hegel and Kant are so important, right? Because that's the root of the heresy, right? Machiavelli that's the root. They're folks existing in Christian settings, saying, if we gather enough power to the government, we can control reality, right? Now Jesus, every authority in heaven and on earth has been given to him, and his word does define reality. The World Economic Forum is an attempt to say, we are going to get enough power that our word defines reality.
Right.
So, it was Machiavelli that gave he was the one that established the metaphysical argument for that. It was Hegel that established the historical mechanism of that, and it was Kant that put it together into a system that the rest of that Christendom said okay to. Right? Christendom said, okay, now we can stomach that heresy. Now we will swallow it into ourselves. And so Machiavelli, Hegel, Kant, that's the root of the heresy. The World Economic Forum is, and Hitler's Germany,
everything that happened in the first turn of the century,
Mao's China, the Pol Pot's Cambodia, the guy in Zimbabwe who was supported by the USSR. Same thing, right?
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
They made that movie, The Last King of Scotland.
Okay.
About him.
Yeah.
It was a very powerful movie. I'm not recommending it.
Okay. All right.
But it was basically an attempt to establish communism in Zimbabwe, and you had this really crazy this guy. He was not crazy. He was very charming, and he basically took over the revolution. It was very charming, but what you didn't know was the amount of violence that he was hiding. Right. So he was kind of a world darling. People loved him. He
was a devil.
Che Guevara type of world darling. But then what was discovered by his personal doctor, who was a Scottish doctor, who he had spoken on his behalf. No, he's such a wonderful guy, and he had hidden all of it from all of these people. They find out that there's this enormous amount of violence going on in the rural areas because he is taking all the land for himself. And but all of that,
tyrants always want the land. That's the same thing with World Economic Forum,
right?
Like, you will own nothing and love it.
And
what? They always come for the land.
And this is where it's
the garden. They always come.
They always come for the garden. Snakes. And they always want to push people into containable units, and then control the land and feed the people. And so,
hey, what were you going to say? Because I got one more thing I want to ask you.
So, but what has happened is suddenly the heresy has come to the front, and the church is like, wait a second, right? Because they come and say, with enough government power behind me, he now needs to be called she. Right? You're like, wait, what? And the church is starting to wake up and say, where does this come from? And realize that there's this heretical, there's this heresy that we have said, we'll leave it be. We've made that deal with the devil. We'll leave it be. We'll just worry about the fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
And the what gets to count as a fundamental gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And then
the gospel becomes this big.
Right, yeah. And so fundamentalist magazines like Christianity Today,
or yesterday,
which was started as a fundamentalist magazine. All of a sudden you've got these. You look around and you say, "Oh man, we got cancer," and the cancer's everywhere. It has metastasized everywhere, and so. But thankfully, God raises the dead. So
yeah, that's why I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah. It's just like it's almost like God's like, all right, these bones are almost dead, and so now I'm going to ask a prophet, hey, can these dead bones live? Yeah. But they got to die first, So and that's people ask me, is there hope? I was like, only when it's all the way dead, because that's when God likes to work, So I don't. Yes, this goes back to our trust in God and knowledge kind of thing. We know how God works,
right?
This is why we don't have to be scared of gas prices. We don't have to be scared of what's coming. We know how God works. Faithfulness is our goal and our key, and that's what we want to seek. Okay, so moving all this into the same, I don't want to switch anything. I think this is all in the same swing of things. There have been so many shootings now getting public attention that have always existed. Okay, this is not new. In some ways, we've always known in mass shootings, and so people are talking about the Second Amendment in way more destructive ways than they have before in the past. I think the Uvalde situation has made people a little concerned because of the way the police handled the situation, the fact that their kids were in there, and it was one of the larger shootings too. 19 people.
I mean, it's hard as the information comes out to know
what actually
happened, but the reports are that they were like handcuffing parents.
Yeah.
That were trying to run in. They were tasing adults that tried to go in and save the kids.
Well, even some of the head chief officers and the lieutenants are just saying, yeah, we probably should have went in, and so that's
So, it's the story is not coming together into the narrative. I think that the left wants either. Right. So
some of it's coming out. Some of this didn't happen that way. Yeah, it's a mixed bag.
It's always a mess, but that one, I think you have you have this building narrative that you think, okay, this is going to play right into it, and it doesn't. It's not fitting well
into any narrative.
And now we have enough alternative news sources that you didn't have, say, 10 years ago.
That's right.
That now the story is the narrative is getting harder and harder to control,
or even understand, which I think was the point. But nevertheless, the liberals are taking this crisis seriously,
right?
And they're trying to. They had the Judiciary Committee, they call it an emergency meeting on some gun laws. I think what is it? I have the bill here. What is it called? 7910, I think it is. Where's that bill? I got so many news stories that I got from reading for Cross Politics. I was like, I know I'm going to need this at some point. I don't know if I kept it. I think it's Bill HR 7910. Yep, got it. Found it. Yep, HR 7910. My memory, look at that. I saw these books you got me reading.
Yep.
And the 5 things that they want to do is raise the age, prevent gun trafficking, they will make sure that they get rid of untraceable firearms. They want a safe storage in your home. They want to make sure that this is a law that you have. That's what they're trying to do with 7910. Make sure I want to know how they're going to do that. They want to close the bump stock loophole. They want to keep America safe. That's their buyback program. So that's what Judiciary Committee is meeting on. I think even right now, I think they're trying to get something voted on this week. And I was listening to some of the conversations that was happening there, watching the committee. This is what I do for my job. So people, I hope you know I love you, so you don't ever have to do this kind of stuff. But one of the things that I started noticing was that the other side, the left, was telling much better stories than we were.
Yeah.
And they were telling heart-wrenching stories, and like their appeal to emotion, while it was a fallacy, that mug was working.
Yeah. And
I'm totally opposed to everything that they're saying or doing. But you can't forget this. You have this 30% that are liberals, you are progressive, however you want to see it. Then you have this 40% that are on the right, conservative, Republican, whatever you want to say, but that's the makeup. The fight is for this 30% in the middle. That's where the fight is. And so if you're fighting for that 30% in the middle, their stories are winsome to that 30% who doesn't swing one way or the other. And then the right comes in here after hearing all these wonderful stories, and then they make their stance. Hey, these people want to take away your First Amendment rights and your Second Amendment rights. Most people don't even know what they are.
Yeah.
Right. And they say, and that's what they want to do. And the right is absolutely correct about their assessment of the left.
Yeah.
But they have no stories for the First Amendment or the Second Amendment or any of the amendments that hold up against the other stories. I mean, so if this was a fight and Pharaoh's men threw down their staff, the right would just say, see, they play with snakes. See these guys up here with snakes while they're holding their staff in their hand.
Yeah.
And so snakes, we know this is witchcraft. But they have nothing there to swallow up the other serpents. And I'm looking at this like, guys, when this is not going to win the day.
Right.
When we're all saying this is not beautiful, this is true, but there's no beauty behind it. So then it doesn't give any equity to this at all. And I was like, I want to talk, what are the kind of stories, or how do we need to be dealing with? I'm grateful for the First Amendment. I'm grateful for the Second Amendment. I think these are good things. But how do I start communicating these in a way where the stories about these commitments, these amendments are persuasive in a way that swallows up the other side's story without poo-pooing on it? We lost children
right
to a maniac.
Yep.
That's a real thing. I don't know how you can't see that and not be emotionally moved by that and say, hold on, something needs to happen. And now we can talk about what that is and have a different position on it, but I don't care who you are. I don't want to live in a world where people can just walk in and kill 100 folks.
Right.
And like, and that just go unmanaged. Something's wrong here. Wherever the system, there's a break in the system somewhere. And everybody's looking at the mechanism in one sense and examining that, or saying, they're all looking at the mechanism and saying, no, not this. And yes, this. And there isn't a better story that we're telling even outside. How do we deal with that?
I mean, I think what's so hard is we're a long ways down the road already.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Facts.
So it's not like, what do we, it's not like we're starting from scratch. Like we're starting so far down the road that people say, oh my gosh, if he had never gotten a gun.
Yeah.
In fact, if guns didn't exist, the world would be such a better place.
At least we wouldn't have mass shootings like this.
And you say, okay, how that? And people are like, I know, we should get rid of guns. Like, well,
or they do this other thing, which is like, listen, we're just gonna live in a world where 300 people can die. And that's just how it's going to be. We just need to have more guns so people can shoot those guys before they kill 300.
Right.
And it's kind of a cold.
It's, yeah. So as if you've got a sentimental argument versus a sentimental argument versus a non-sentimental argument.
Right.
Right. And if you have to choose between sentiment, like we're choosing between living kids and dead kids. Right? Like that's the choice. We're like, well, sometimes you just got to make sacrifices for your freedom. Like, what are we are not in the same conversation. Right. But I don't think we realize what conversation we're in. I think that's a big part of it. Because it's not as if it's not as if there was no violence and now all of a sudden there's starting to be violence, right? There wasn't. What we have is we've got the weaponization of these stories by tyrants, right? And because we don't realize that's what's going on, right? We don't realize that this is actually a power grab, right? We've misidentified what kind of thing is going on. We think we're in one conversation when we're actually in a different situation altogether.
We know it's a power grab. We just don't know what power grab what the power grab is or
right.
what it's for.
Yeah,
right.
So yeah, we don't understand. But the nobody understands what's going on, right? The people that are having the argument, because so a lot of this just has to do with because anybody can put their voice out there.
Yeah.
Right. Social media has made it possible for anyone to put their voice out there, and then for people to algorithmically control which voices get heard. Yeah.
So it must be everybody saying that.
Yeah. So, yeah. Exactly. So what we don't have is an actual education to sort through things, and that's not coming anytime in the near future. Right? You can't get, it's going to take time to get back to that. So I don't think we've got a werewolf problem. So there's not a silver bullet, right? What we have is we've got a deeply entrenched, long-term power grab that is kind of reaching its pinnacle. And so we need to actually start with our kids, having these conversations with our kids, and kind of rethink what is the nature of authority, what is the nature of power. So, because you've got people saying like, oh, you know what we need is if only the police had guns, we'd be good. Like, it was less than a year ago that we were trying to defund the police, right? We remember. Do we not remember what the defund the police movement? Because now we're in the arm the police movement. Like,
well, it was just less than a year ago that the police were arresting the good folks.
Right. Yeah. So So all of a sudden, we're like, wait, now we're saying, so the fact that this conversation was shifted so quickly and so completely from defund the police as the righteous, the righteous answer to arm the police and take away everyone else's guns. The flip was so complete and so quick that I think that what we need to do as Christians is say, oh, there's a deeper problem than this, right? So it's helpful to remember the history of the Second Amendment. It's helpful to understand why it's there, but I think that that actually our problem is a rejection of hierarchy, right? A rejection of God's understanding of hierarchy that is going on, that makes us this susceptible, right? This susceptible to the shift and the move and the change of things, right? So the Gnostic understanding of hierarchy is that the people with the power and the money are more human, and so they get to make the decisions for us, right? So it makes complete sense that nobody gets a weapon except for the police, except for the army, except for the Secret Service, in that situation, right? Because, well, they have the money and the power, and so
only the important people get guns.
Only important people get guns, right? So criminals and important people get guns. Everyone else is just a plebeian, right? Everyone else is they're either defended or taken advantage of, and so then we just need to increase the presence of the police for the good of the people, right? Increase. Right?
How is that hierarchical problematic? How is that a problematic situation hierarchically?
So
is that a sentence? It is now.
Because it has to do with the nature of the. So Aristotle says that the people that rule, it is just for slaves to have a master, because the master is more human than the slave, right? So it's just there's not an injustice in his view, so long as the people up the hierarchy are better than the people down the hierarchy.
That's a messed up metaphysic.
It's a messed up metaphysic, right? And we are slipping back into that same understanding right now, or we have slipped back into it. So that when the tyranny, we justify it. Right? The people at the bottom justify the tyranny. They're the ones defending it. It's not being forced on us. There's a handful of small situations it's being forced on us. But for the most part, what we've learned is that the president can stand up and say, okay, everyone, you have to do this now. If you have more than 500 people in your company, you have to go get a vaccine. And all of the companies jump to. Right?
They come out with policy. They start
policy,
yeah.
Right? They respond.
I think it was more than 100.
Right? Was it 100?
It was more than 100. Yeah.
Because now the president didn't have to file. He didn't have to get congressmen to file a law. He didn't have to. There is a way that laws are made in our country.
Yeah.
And it's not by the declaration of a president. Right? It says he can't do that.
Yeah.
But we jumped to. The people jumped to. So that's a metaphysical error that says he's there because he's president, and therefore he's
the most
us.
important person of us.
He is the one who gets to make those sorts of calls, right? But the reality is, if we are so the common law system, it developed the way it did with a metaphysic that understood that the person holding the office he is going to be, he's going to rotate out at some point, and another person is going to hold the office, and it's rule of equals by an equal, right? Right. So so in that situation, right, all the knights carry swords, people are allowed to have weapons and guns because we're equals that currently have an equal that is there in charge, but he's a replaceable equal, right? The office of hierarchy is an office, is an economic, not an ontological office, right? So why do the police have guns? Well, the police have guns because they're in the office of the police officer, and they're there to defend the state and represent the city on our behalf, or the county on our behalf. Never the federal government, according to our Constitution, but they're not allowed to have that. Federal government is not allowed to have police because
that's where we're going though.
But we're going that way, right? But we're going that way because of a shift in metaphysics, right? That says gather power to the highest possible place, the most power to the highest possible place, and you'll have control of reality, right? That and so but if power is a limited commodity, then the best way to do it is to take it away from the people at the bottom, because then the people at the top have more, right? And for the people at the top to have more, they have to take it from the bottom, right? It's an economic understanding of power, glory, and wealth that is limited. And so to get it to one place, you have to take it from some other place, right? And so
evolutionary. It's limited resources.
Exactly. Power, coercive power, all of that is, you have to take it away from the bottom to get it moved up to the top.
Economic form in the same, you're thinking the same thing.
Exactly.
Okay,
right?
Yeah.
So it's all it. So, but what we do is say, well, I have a right to self-defense. Right? Now, that is an ugly story and an ugly argument, right? And it's going to continue failing, but partly because we've already bought into
a bad metaphysic.
Now, so let's say I were getting to say, let's rebuild the rhetoric for the Second Amendment. I would immediately say, never use the term self-defense again, right? Never use that term again. Just reframe the whole thing as neighbor defense. I have a responsibility to protect my neighbors. Because you do. Mm-hmm. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, I am. Right? Mm-hmm. That's why it's important for me to have the firepower on my hip that I have on my hip. I have a responsibility to protect my neighbor. Right? God has raised me, has given all of us that responsibility. So one of the things that I think is fascinating is in the history of education is that it was during the Reformation that universal education became a desire. But it was because of the universal priesthood of all believers and the doctrine of vocation, that all vocations were glorifying to God. And then so you actually have a sifting out of some of the vestiges of a Gnostic metaphysic amongst the Reformed churches that was still there through the Middle Ages, right? There's this fight for metaphysics all throughout the Middle Ages, and the Enlightenment runs with Gnosticism, the Reformation runs with the covenantal metaphysic, and universal education becomes the desire, the mantra of the reformers, because they run with this covenantal metaphysics, and then the Enlightenment tries to take over and claim it as its own, right? So Christians are pushing for a universal education. The Enlightenment sees that that's what they're pushing for. I mean, this is in the American story. The Enlightenment folks see that if they also push for a universal education, that the Christians will come along with them. And so they start saying, we're pushing for a universal scientific education. The Christians are like, universal education, yeah, that's what we want. And so they drop the classical education in order to combine for the universal education with the scientific education people.
It's got education in there.
Because it's got universal and it's got education. We want those things. But they had reframed the definition of what an education was along scientific rather than historic grounds, and Gnosticized education. But the Christians were not aware of what was going on because they had made some of the same metaphysical errors. And so they went along with it, and Christians pushed for universal public education because they wanted a universal education, and that was their idea. Right? And so they fell prey to it. So the being aware of the way our own rhetoric is being warped and used against us is something that I think we need to learn how to do, and realize that so much of the rhetoric of the left about gun control is actually co-opted Christian sentiment being used against us.
Can I push back against your Second Amendment stuff a little bit? I found it a little faulty. Because I'm thinking there's a couple reasons. I hear what you're saying about rebuilding the Second Amendment.
Rebuilding the rhetoric.
The rhetoric
in
of
defense of the Second Amendment.
So that's helpful. So the rebuilding the rhetoric of the Second Amendment. But there's still some things inside the rhetoric that I want to maintain that I think are important. And this is where I think would be helpful to work through, is that, yes, I want to love my neighbor, but God has given me a garden to protect as well, right? And so part of my responsibility is to make sure that my wife can play Boys to Men while she's doing dishes and cooking dinner, and my kids can dance
ABC,
to it.
BBD.
Yeah.
East Coast family.
And that even comes before my obligation, responsibility to my neighbor.
Well,
right.
In a Christian metaphysic, your wife is your first neighbor.
Right.
So
I see what you're saying. So you're putting neighbor as in my neighbor is
my first neighbor is my wife. I got you.
Okay, so we just need to work through the definition of neighbor, because I'm thinking like, okay.
Yeah, so but self-defense is always it always comes across as I'm going to be walking down the street and I'm going to be afraid. Right. What and
that's fine too. So I don't have a problem with it.
Right. So legally, right? That's
you're talking about the rhetoric.
I'm talking about the rhetoric, right? So legally, self-defense is a real thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But
it sits underneath this type of rhetoric.
Yeah, it is. If we lead with that rhetorically, we're playing right into the hands of the way that our other aspects of our rhetoric are being used against us.
But also, too, the other thing that I want to add to that, and okay, I'm going to challenge that maybe, but there's other things I want to add to that, which is part of, I want to honor my fathers, and my fathers saw you guys as dangerous.
Yes. Well, and that's the other aspect of the rhetoric that I think we need to rebuild.
Yeah.
And
how do we,
when Reagan said,
or should I say, he didn't want us to become slaves. And I have a problem with that.
Right,
Just saying,
So when Reagan said some of the scariest languages, some of the scariest words you're ever going to hear is "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Right. And so this is part of the historical story that we have let slip away. Right. That gun control has always been the tip of the spear for the government taking advantage of people, right? So this has all become rhetoric of citizen on citizen violence, right? That's all we ever talk about. What we don't talk about is the way the government has used gun control to allow, or to as a precursor to government on citizen violence, right? So we need to be telling the story of the establishment of the gun control laws to take away black guns.
Come on now,
right? We need the story, stories about Venezuelan gun controls, but also just, you remember that the reason that we needed guns was because of the redcoats, right? They were the government, right? The government turned its guns on the citizens. And so the King George tried to take away our guns because he wanted to be the only one that had them. Right.
That's the story we got to be.
That's the story. So in terms of, telling the story, I think we've got to rhetorically be able to say, look, to that there's a chivalrous reason to carry guns, right? That if you take away the guns out of the hands of the chivalrous, all you get are the bad knights, right? This is one of the reasons I brought you the story of the champions of the Round Table.
Is this? Where's that at? So, I got 3 books here. So people who can't see.
Here,
this one right here.
I really like the intro to this one. So,
can I just, while you're doing that real quick, I just want to talk about the rate. So this is how I've been thinking about this.
Okay.
Particularly, I want to tell right now it's so hot to talk about racism and prejudice in America.
Right.
And so I'm seeing that is a rhetorical argument that I want to be able to use. And I'm like, do you know how racist gun laws? Have I ever? We've talked about this, right?
About this, yeah.
We are some of the first gun laws we ever had in America that stopped citizens from getting weapons were designed to make sure black men, particularly freed black men,
right,
didn't get guns. And if there's ever an argument to say, hey, the government treated black folks horribly, and then they made everybody black folks,
right, and
treated them all horribly, this is like the argument for it. And I'm not going to spend all this time now because we've had a long show already, but one of the first laws in the colony of Virginia that mentioned African Americans was in 1664 Act that barred free blacks from owning firearms. Where's that project at?
Right. 1664 project.
There we go. We're going to start one.
That was 1664
we're
project.
In the colony. We haven't even established.
Yeah.
Right? It was free blacks.
Right.
Not a slave. I can get that. I can understand why you might not want a slave to have a gun. I might understand. I just want to say Abraham slaves owned weapons. Another pre-revolutionary example.
And he trained them.
Come on, facts now. Because they were actually, you couldn't be more freer than the Abraham slave. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Whenever somebody can inherit your own stuff, you're a free man. Okay, so I should put this article up. It's so good. This is just another one. Another pre-revolutionary example is this is what it's called, an act for the better ordering of Negroes and slaves enacted by South Carolina in 1712, which included provisions addressing firearm ownerships by blacks. Virginia also passed an act for preventing Negroes in insurrections around the same time. Delaware instituted a law in December of 1831 that required free blacks to obtain firearm licenses if they wish to have weapons. In the same month, Maryland and Virginia passed laws that prohibited free blacks from carrying guns. Georgia, followed by barring free blacks from firearm ownership entirely in 1833. Hey, this ain't that long ago. Although Nat Turner rebellion motivated Southern legislation to reenact gun ownership to black people, ironically, no firearms were used during that uprising. In 1844, the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled that the state versus Newsom, that laws barring free blacks from using guns were not in violation of the Second Amendment.
Right.
A similar decision was A similar decision was handed down in Georgia's court case of Cooper versus Mayer or Savannah, which ruled free persons of color have never been recognized as citizens. They are not intended to bear arms.
Right.
And this keeps going.
Right. So, this is the question that we should be asking. If you say you're not allowed to have guns anymore, what is that saying about who you are?
What's
are you
the metaphysic of that? Yeah, absolutely.
You're saying you're not a citizen. You're not a free person, right? You are an employee at best of the state, if not a slave of the state.
Well, you're saying we see you the same way that we saw black people in 1664.
Right.
Freed black men can't have guns. Right? So they tell, but that should have told you then the mentality of the culture where it was going to go,
Right.
how they looked at their free man.
And this is where you have in a historical irony, right? At the same time, you have the all of the establishments of the 5-day work week going on, right? Which said that. Did we talk about this already?
No.
Okay, so this is from a Gary North book as well. So
my guy, man.
You have the establishment of the 5-day work week, the limitation of the work week to 5 days for citizens because they were free. They needed the 6th day to be able to work on the improvement of their own property. Right. So you have
that's that leisure.
Yeah. So the 5 days you could have somebody work for you for 5 days, but that 6th day they needed because they were free, they needed to be able to work on their own property. Right. And so that's
written into our Constitution, right?
I don't know if it's in the Constitution of I
have to remember
federal
where I saw
Constitution,
that from.
but it's written into it begins getting written into laws.
Yeah.
Right? And at the same time, so you have the calendar being established as the calendar of a free nation, of a nation of free men. At the same time, you have the slow legalization of slavery that comes finally to a head in the middle of the 1700s.
Because we forgot common law.
Right.
We're amending it at this time. Yeah.
So you have the calendar in direct opposition to the laws. And so there's no way to not end up with a civil war. Right? When you've got the calendar saying one thing metaphysically and the law system saying another. Those two things are setting up a civil war. It's unavoidable.
All right. So, okay. We got to go because there's so much. You brought me books.
I did.
You're a good friend. Thank you.
So the one of them is the W.T. Jones. That his history of Western philosophy is really great. But I saw this. The volume 2 was there, and so I snagged it.
The medieval mind.
Yeah. So this is W.T. Jones. He was the guy that first put me on to the need for understanding what had gone wrong. So that's a multi-volume set, but that is the best volume. And the last volume is also really good. But
Thomas Metaphysics.
Yeah. So that one is really, really good. But he's got explanations of the social structures that and feudalism and how feudalism grows out of the metaphysic and then turns around and affects the metaphysic. It's really good.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So and then this is the story of the champions of the Round Table.
Oh, so good. This is great, man.
Some King Arthur stories.
I was looking for something from King Arthur. I was like, I need to hear better story,
And what is amazing about King Arthur stories is you realize how ignoble we are, how unchivalrous we are, and you read a little bit of the chivalry and what's amazing is they understood that the only way to defeat bad knights is with good knights. But just to have a culture in which women are honored. Right? So one of the vows a knight took is that I will be available to aid any woman. That's a vow. So the knights took a vow to come to the aid of any woman.
Help me, Obi-Wan. You're my only hope.
Right? So it's amazing. And so that chivalry, comes all the way into like our Westerns. We use something like High Noon.
Yeah.
Our Westerns are still just the retellings of these stories. And
wow. Thank you, man.
Yeah, so that one's great.
That.
And then
this little
A River Runs Through It. It's a collection of
I've heard this
a
story
novella
before.
And then a couple of short stories. But Norman MacLean tells the story of being raised in Missoula, Montana, by a Presbyterian minister.
Okay, this was a movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, they made a movie, beautiful movie, but it's a story about fatherhood and just kind of a literary education in the Old West, and
really,
it's a beautiful, beautiful. It's my second favorite novella. It's novella, yeah, short novel.
Okay,
longer
novella.
Longer than a short story, shorter than a novel.
Man, it's funny. Okay, so much still to talk about. This is what happens when we don't talk for 2 weeks.
I know.
Somebody got on and was like, man, I was wondering where you guys were. I was like, you ain't listening to all them other shows anyway. I don't know what you're talking about. Hey, how do I create time to read look at my shelf.
I know.
I got so many books over here, and I'm reading through them slowly, and then I have a stack of articles. I'm doing a daily show now, but I need all of this content. I need it in my head, and there's no USB that I can plug in and download it. I'm good. What does it look like? Especially not just for anybody. I'm talking about for me. Like, how do I spend my time working through all of these books? And I need more books, and
Yeah, you always need more books. I was yesterday.
I saw that picture.
Yeah, that's why my wife and I both brought home a box of new books the same day, or that, and she looked at my box and I looked at her box, and she said, "You need to buy me a bigger house. We're running out of library." So, but yeah, because we both got a problem.
I don't know if it's a problem.
Yeah, I know. I always say, look, I could be addicted to heroin, and I'm not.
Right,
I'm addicted to
this
books,
is the right
right?
addiction.
So, but
my wife's like, your addiction to heroin might be cheaper.
Yeah, it might be. So my wife just put in a new set of books, or new set of shelves in the basement, and I was like, oh man, that'll be fun to fill. She's like, no, these will be full, and she was right. It was the books that didn't fit in we've got,
because you got boxes of books still that
not
haven't
anymore.
been.
We finally got them all out.
Oh, that's where they went to.
We got we've got 22 feet of 10-foot tall bookshelves in the library, and they're full. And now we're starting to do some of the stuff on the side, but yeah. But how do you get to it? I mean, the thing is it's a plod, right? You read you read consistently, and you get through an enormous amount. So there's no secret to this. There's no secret to it.
You set out a time to read, and you do it.
And you do it.
It's kind of like working out.
Consistent, yeah.
Well, you see how this worked out for me.
Of
course, I might read before I go. But it feels like sometimes like a workout. It does feel like a workout.
It does. And, some of it has to do with picking, finding the books, that finding a good guide. So I've taken kind of C.S. Lewis as my
like Jason Farley
reading guide. But I want to do a book group. We've been talking about it.
We are going to do it. We got to figure out exactly. So, there's a couple of things. I think
the mechanics of it.
That's going to be a challenge. But I think
we landed on our first book.
Yes.
Yeah.
First couple of books, I think.
Couple of books.
So, you know how they came up with the Harvard Classics, the 5-foot bookshelf? So we talked about this. I think we're going to come up with our 52 books.
Our 52 books, yeah.
That like right now that would lead you hopefully to the Harvard class.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, 52 books, that's only a book a week.
Yeah, for you.
No, I mean, I'm not saying. I mean, you could read it in a year. But that's not what I'm saying you need to do. But I'm saying we've got more time than we think.
I am convinced of that.
Yeah.
But I can't even get around to watching news.
Yeah.
Right. Like so.
I mean, so I love Audible, Audible books. I get the 1 credit a month.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually bought in and said I'm cutting some of my Netflix stuff off, and so I got 3. I can't wait till it resets right now because I use them up every time.
Yeah,
but that's been my best friend is Audible.
Yeah, so I have a 10-minute, so I had about a 12-minute commute, right? So I've also worked to slowly get the speed up at which I listen. So and that's been worth it, and that's just a matter of building up the strength of your concentration. So once you get that concentration built up, you can listen at higher rates of speed
and get more in. Yeah, I got about to get a 20-minute commute, so I'm happy for that. Actually, it's gonna be 40 minutes a day. I'm actually really excited for that.
So and then there's also like one of my other early guides was George Grant.
Yeah,
Word MP3. I bought the George Grant History of the World set, and that gives you the frame narrative for everything.
Oh, George Grant History of the World set did not have that.
Yeah, I got it through Word MP3 back in the day. I'm assuming it's still there. And so that gives you it's just that chipping away, and knowing that it's a multi-generational project, so you chip it away, and and then now I'm having in this constant conversation with my kids about what they're reading and moving forward, and so there's always so this is I just picked up the reprint Martin Boetzer on education, and it's from India. So this company in India does these reprints of old Reformation.
Tell them to send you a PDF.
But he's got this. There's a really interesting thing. So he says the Boetzer's plan for bringing the kingdom of Christ to earth, like that of Plato for his ideal state, is utopian. Right? Because Boetzer is a postmillennialist.
Like all good Christians.
Yet a man who wished Englishmen to attend to the manufacture of cloth and to metalworking was not a seer of false dreams. Right. So one of the striking differences between Boetzer's plan and that of Plato's is that Boetzer was designed from the beginning for all the people as equally the redeemed of Christ. Plato, indeed, does not absolutely close his ruling class to the common people, but the gulf is much greater than that with the Christian, who, though he does not suggest the abolition of the hereditary aristocracy, makes preparation for the highest functions free to all of every rank who show themselves able to serve the public. Thus, as the Reformers characteristically did, he shows himself a genuine champion of universal freedom. Right? So he's summarizing Martin Boetzer's book on education. He puts big quotes and then summarizes it. And he basically just says, he's like, it doesn't matter what you do for a living. You're a free man. So educate yourself like a free man. Right. So Aaron and I are working on starting and this is Aaron, my wife's brainchild, and we've been talking about this for a long time, is educating parents. So we tend to say, okay, we got to really focus in on education, and so then we talk about kids a lot, which is important and good.
That's good, yeah.
I mean, we poured our life into the establishment of a K through 12 classical Christian school, and that we love. But we realized really early on, like the second year we were doing it, we need a school for the parents. Right?
What do you think this is? Yeah, for real.
So she wants to call it the Great Conversation, and pick a book a month, and we just work through it and teach parents because the kids are going home to parents and there's not a conversation at home. And so what does it take? Well, it takes getting the parents involved in the great conversation of mankind so that the kids go home from their classical education to a home where that great conversation is happening.
It's already taking place.
So, and so, my wife is working out the details on how we're going to do that. She's just going to make giant pots of soup and have people over to the library.
That's the way.
And, it's so a big part of it. And, this is, we've talked about this is once the mindset sets in, I'm a free man. What do free men spend their time doing? Free men spend their time getting an education. Their whole life is involved in getting an education, because that's what free men do. It's the same. I mean, it's the same understanding of the Second Amendment. Who am I? Well, I'm a knight of the realm of Christ, right? So I got to be ready to defend the weak and the powerless. That's what I do. That's who I am. I'm a knight of the realm. I'm a free man. I get an education. So, and then raising your kids understanding, like, well, what are you?
Unite your kids with the education.
Yeah, unite your kids with an education. They're the free sons and daughters of the king of the realm, and so just such a different understanding.
We don't even have the conversation then about second. Well, we got to have laws and guns laws.
Yeah.
It's like, no. What kind of people are these?
What kind of people are these?
What are they for? And so then what do they do?
Yeah.
They're free men. Yeah, that's really good.
So
that's
my daughter's best friend just did his thesis on Booker T. Washington. And so
I need to go read a autobiography. He's so good.
So good. But that's his whole thing is he's like, look, make us citizens, don't make us citizens. I'm not a lawmaker. What I am going to do is I'm going to create people, a whole generation that is ready for citizenship, right? That understand that they're free men, that understand how to serve their neighbor, that understand who they are. And so even if we don't get citizenship in this generation, you're going to be begging us to be citizens in the next, right? And it's like, man, so whether you are with him or not on his argument, he understood.
He gets it.
Who the people in front of him were.
Yeah, the metaphysics.
They were free men.
Yeah.
Right. The government isn't granting them freedom. They are free men. Right. The government may acknowledge it or not, but I've got a bunch of free men here, and so I'm starting them a college. I'm giving them an education. Right. So he's not waiting around for the government to grant them freedom. He would have been so upset when the government tried to claim Juneteenth.
I was just gonna say, okay, we're gonna end on that. Yeah, we'll end on that.
I still am upset about that.
We got to do a whole show around that.
I know we do.
That's gonna be a whole. Yeah, I think we need to do the Christian calendar.
Yes,
and let's do that. Let's do that next. You want to do that next?
Yeah, talk about Christian calendar.
Yeah, because we got to talk about that in Pride Month, and it's a Juneteenth, Pride Month, and Christian calendar. That's
movements of the stars.
Yeah,
because we're talking calendars.
Movements. Okay, that's what we're doing next. All right. Because I don't even know what you just said. Movements of the stars. I do know, but it's gonna be fun. All right.